All right, so we're joined now by journalist and former web editor at the Daily Pakistan, Waqas Ahmed. He's here to talk about the latest in Pakistan. Waqas, welcome.
Thank you.
And so you and I were talking a couple days ago, and you flagged for me a public statement made by the who was it, Pakistani Interior Minister Rana Sanullah Khan, and he said, "I am warning PTI against the announcement of another long march. One thing I want to illustrate: as soon as the long march is announced, quote, let them come, and I'll see how they cross barriers this time." Unquote. So this is what he himself posted on Twitter May 31st, essentially warning protesters to stay away, or he's going to respond violently. Where did that come from, and what has happened since then?
First, we need to understand the background of the Interior Minister Rana Sanullah. He is the former Law Minister of Punjab, and he has murdered protesters in the past. He has killed 14. He ordered police to kill 14 protesters in Model Town in Lahore, and now he has become the Interior Minister.
So these are not empty threats that he's making.
These are not empty threats. He has the potential to follow through on them, and he has done that in the past. So situation in Pakistan, keeping in mind all of these threats and protests that are potentially going on, it is very precarious. It is very dangerous. People could die. Last week, around 25th May, protests were at their peak, and these policemen were shooting rubber bullets and firing tear gas at the protesters. A night before this protest, there were 4,000 raids on the houses of the political activists of political party PTI, and 1,000 activists were arrested in a single night. So as you can see, this is a mass-scale crackdown on peaceful protest that is happening in Pakistan, and peaceful protest that can potentially go towards bloodshed because of the brazenness of the government.
And to ask an obvious question, what does this mean for the future of the opposition? You know, going forward, how does this get resolved in the weeks ahead? I think the likelihood is that it doesn't get resolved, but just in terms of like where the clash goes going forward, how does it affect the opposition's ability to make the point?
This is exactly what the government wants to do. The government wants to completely limit the movement of opposition. They want a complete crackdown on the opposition so that they can rule till the next elections, which they do not want to happen soon. Right now, the Pakistani government is making some tough decisions about raising petrol prices. So oil prices have raised 30% in Pakistan recently. They're looking at hyperinflation. Poor people cannot afford to commute anymore. So this government is extremely unpopular, and the only threat to their power is coming from the opposition, which is Imran Khan's PTI. And to stop that threat, to stop that, the only way this government could be removed, they have resorted to fascism, basically.
And what is the heat wave doing to the political situation? And can you describe what you're hearing about what the heat is like over there now?
It's terrible. It's in some of the places it's really hard to even survive without air conditioners, and most of Pakistanis do not have air conditioners. So we've heard of reports of mango crops suffering at least 30% lower output because of the heat wave, and millions of people are their livelihoods are connected with these crops. So we'll see this as climate change increases, and as the heat wave goes up, Pakistan is going to suffer terribly, and there will be droughts, and there will be food shortages and crop shortages. There was recently the second biggest forest in the world of pine cones was burned in Suleiman mountain ranges in Quetta, in Balochistan, I mean. So Pakistan is suffering extremely from climate change, and this is the background of everything that's happening. While the people suffer from climate change, the powerful in Pakistan are involved in this power politics. that does not take into account their plight and their suffering. Pakistani institutions with Pakistani politicians, which are still to this date basically feudal lords who own large tracts of land, who own most of the industry in Pakistan. So it is all between them. They're like passing the baton between each other while the poor suffer. And people are starting to respond. People are starting to come out, and people have started to protest. And the only way the government has found to deal with these protests is to crack down on them with violence and tear gas and maybe bullets.
And speaking of that, exactly, as Western governments are navigating, watching these heinous crackdowns in which opposition is squashed to the point where people are completely disempowered, what should people know about how Western governments are responding and navigating that sort of question about how they approach leadership in Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, as this crackdown unfolds?
The Western relationship with Pakistan should be based on human rights also, right? If Pakistani government is cracking down on protesters, and if Pakistani interior minister is threatening to kill protesters in broad daylight, a thing that he has done in the past, this should come up in all bilateral relationships and meeting with Pakistan. Democracy should be the first thing. If Pakistan does not have democracy, any government, any international government that wants to have a relationship with the government that is undemocratic will not have legitimacy of any dialogue, of any agreement that is reached. So in Pakistan, there should be a minimum level of democracy. The opposition should be allowed to work. The opposition should be allowed to criticize the government. Right now, the top 4 Pakistani journalists have police cases filed against them. The police has been threatening journalists openly, and they have filed cases against so many. Even I have been threatened by some people in Pakistan. So it's really hard. You can't even name certain institutions and how they've been involved in interfering in Pakistani politics. It's really, really hard to work in these circumstances.
And real quickly, I had seen the news reports on these charges against these journalists. And can you talk a little bit about who these journalists are relative to their standing? Like you said that they're some of the top journalists. That's my understanding too. Is that these are some of the very premier journalists in Pakistan who are coming under threat.
Previously used to work for Reuters, and he's known to international media. And then he went on to work for Dawn. And he's working for Pakistan's top TV channel that is like constantly been getting highest ratings. So this is not some random dude. This is like the prime time TV anchor of Pakistan. And he has a police case against them. And he, not just one. In many police stations in Pakistan, there are cases filed against them, charging him with treason. So the crime of treason is punishable by death in Pakistan. So this journalist is potentially facing death in Pakistan just for saying things that are true.
Okay, well, thanks so much for updating on this. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much.
Stick around. We'll have more Rising right after this.